Have coaches lost their damn mind? There's a lot to talk about this week. This week on Iceman and Coach. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Iceman and Coach. This is the Iceman, Matt Freites. That is the coach, Brad Powell. We should apologize for last week. We missed last week and did not put out an episode. We intended to. We had a recording time, and things just happened, and we weren't able to do so. I am back from South Carolina, and the coach is still in Peoria. Coach, how you doing, buddy?
Iceman, hey, life happens. We've talked about that many times, but the best news is that we are here. And excited to bring you another week of sports content, as only you and I could do it, my friend. You just got back home, right, from a little family time away, which obviously I think we recorded twice while you were out of town, right? And how's it feel to be back at the homestead?
It is great to be back, honestly. I love a change of scenery. Everybody likes being in their home, or at least I think most people do. I've turned into a homebody since I had a kid and since the pandemic, and so I've been branching out a little bit more. I went overseas earlier this year. It's nice to get out of your normal digs, and I'm very lucky. I can take my work with me. I can take all of this recording equipment with me, and we were able to do quite a bit in terms of work and in terms of content creation. I thought that was really, really awesome. Getting to see family, getting to see gators across the street while I'm eating my breakfast. I mean, those are the types of things that I cannot see here in Alexandria, Virginia. So it is good to be back. It's just, it takes a minute to get back into your normal routine, especially for my kid.
Yeah, that's one of the tougher things about going on any sort of a trip is that little period of like reacclimating to day-to-day life. And it is even harder with kids, like you said, getting them settled back into like routines. And then that first day getting up and going to work. And I know that you've got the privilege of being able to work from home for the most part, but that first day of getting up and going back to work is always tough.
Yeah, it really is. But for me, because I worked a lot while I was gone, there wasn't that much of an adjustment. Now, when I was going into the office more frequently, there definitely was. I know just about every single Monday, it was like, I don't want to go back in. I think what I was dreading was my kid was starting a new class, and so it was a complete change in routine at school, and you knew it was going to be rough. He'd been mostly sleeping in his own bed while he was gone, but also not really sleeping all that great, so he ends up in our bed half the time. And when you're on quote-unquote vacation, when you have kids, you're doing mostly the same things that you do when you're at home in a different location. You've been through that. I've been through that. And so there's not as much of a reprieve as there would have been if you didn't have kids. But since we've been home, he's been a trooper. We've gotten back into the swing of things, and it's good to be back. It's nice to sit in an actual studio instead of an office, although I have to admit the backdrop that I had for some of those episodes, especially the 4th of July episode, was pretty damn good.
Yeah, you had some pretty good digs, man. There was no doubt about that. And, like I said, being able to see family, like you were able to, waking up to gators across the street in the morning had to be nice. So, no, I mean, I'm glad you guys had a good time away. But it's nice to kind of have that familiarity of the usual Iceman background, have you back in your domain, right? And comfortable and ready to unleash our opinions on the world.
Yes. One of the things that I did while I was gone was I interviewed or did this show with my Uncle Barry, UB, and that is on YouTube right now, and you can go check that out if you are watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on the podcasting space, you should go to YouTube, and of course you should subscribe. But I had a really great time sharing our platform with him, and he talked a lot of college football, which is pretty cool because college football is right around the corner. We're going to be getting into that before we know it. It's 5 weeks away or something. It was really awesome to be able to share that. And I think that's one thing about all of this that has it hasn't gotten enough of a shine. It's the fact that as we get along in this journey, our kids get older and even our family and friends can partake in this. And I think that's a really cool thing. So I would implore everybody to go check out that episode with my Uncle Barry because he's very knowledgeable, tells great stories just in general, big music guy. And I think it was a great way to sort of bridge the gap between our episodes. So I thought that was probably the coolest thing that we did.
Well, not even bridging the gap between our episodes, but let's talk about bridging the gap between generations, right? And getting his perspective and the way I think it was great how he had opinions on modern sports in a lot of ways, but then would tell stories about things in the past. And so you kind of got the best of both worlds and got a very unique opinion. And I thought that was one of the best parts about it is, that's one of my favorite things about this. That's why, we talk about, here in the future, maybe me doing something with where I'm talking to fans about their own fandom and getting to view the sports world through someone else's eyes is always fascinating to me. And when it is someone that is from a different generation, that just adds to it.
I totally agree. And it's really cool if you're a sports fan to be able to go back in time and appreciate the things that happened in the past. I think one of the things we end up doing today, especially in sports media, is we try to compare all the time. And I think people forget just how great a lot of players were from yesteryear, 50, 60 years ago. And just because the competition around them wasn't what it is today, none of the players were like that. If you go back and look at a Bob Cousy, for instance, he's not going to look like the Adonises that are out on the court in the NBA today, or even the guys that are on the football field. You go back and watch 80s football. The pads are ridiculously large. You can't tell what the physique is on a lot of these guys. And I think that you have to be able to appreciate the past in order to be a little bit more present in today's sports. And I just don't think enough people have a reverence for the past. I think they look at today's athlete and think, this is the best we've ever created. It doesn't negate how great the past was, though.
Not at all. And if it weren't for those players in the past, we wouldn't have what we have today. It was all part of the evolution of the athlete, right? I mean, you hear all these stories, fascinating stories about when strength training got introduced to sports. And Nebraska, I think, kind of has a weird claim to that when Coach Osborne was there, it was like the first college football program to introduce strength training of in some way. And it's crazy to think, something that seems so obvious was just not a part of the game back then in different ways. I mean, a lot of these guys, there's pictures of, and you guys can crucify me for not knowing the guy's name, but I think the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs way back when, there's a photo of him like halftime of the Super Bowl smoking a cigarette and drinking a beer in the locker room. And that's not something. Yeah, sure, these guys today they might partake. You hear stories about guys sitting in the dugout sipping on a beer or something, but a lot of those guys probably aren't smoking. I guarantee you that. I mean, there's so much science that goes into how they handle their bodies. To think, and then you look at what some of those guys did, like the Babe Ruths of the world. What the way he treated his body and what he was able to do under those conditions. Imagine if he had modern day technology and strength training to benefit from. Yeah, while the Bob Cousy's of the world may not be able to create their own shot in today's NBA, it doesn't discount what they did in their era.
100% agree with you. But I think that one thing that we know right now is we're in that period of sports right before football. We talk about this every week, but last week was the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. And famously, I believe now, the day after the All-Star Game is the one day in the calendar year that there is not one sporting event. But something does happen every year around this time, and that is the ESPYs. And maybe the ESPYs don't have the same shine as other award shows, like the Icy Awards, for instance. You should go back to our Super Bowl episode and look at that, of course. But one event that took place at the ESPYs is something that seems to be continuing to bridge the gap generationally, and that is Jim Valvano's speech at the ESPYs. I believe it was 1993. If you are listening or watching and you don't know who Jimmy V is, then you're probably living under a rock and you should go and hit the Google machine and figure out how to use it, because it is probably one of the most inspirational speeches that's ever really been said, especially in sports. And maybe you could put that in the pantheon of speeches that have ever been given. But Jimmy V still has a resounding presence today. I think if ESPN can be taken to task about a lot of things, there's one thing that I don't think that it can. It's that it has done a masterful job of keeping that legacy alive and keeping, I think, what he stood for alive. All of those principles he talked about in that. And I love hearing that speech. I can never hear it enough. It's honestly one of the best things that's ever been done.
I could not agree more. That speech it's one of those that never gets old, right? Because it's a real speech. It's not. Don't get me wrong. There's great movie speeches out there and things, but those are written, fabricated, filmed. They're not real life speeches. His was. It was one of the most authentic speeches that I've ever heard, and I guess we call it a speech because formally that's what it was. But I mean, I think it was really just a man pouring his heart out to you about what life means to him and sharing with the world what he thought was the secret to living a full life. And it's every time I watch it, man, it impacts me in such a significant way. And so, and then you pair that against, like Survive and Advance is one of my favorite 30 for 30s the ESPN's ever put together. And you hear those guys in that show talk about some of the speeches he gave in the locker room, and he's like, I think there was I don't know, assistant coach or manager or something in that. He's like, once, I think he gave a speech during the national championship game, and he says, when those guys left the locker room, they didn't go out the door, they ran through the brick wall, type of thing. And, to be able to motivate, especially adults, is a very unique skill. And I think that the way that you do that is through being authentic and people believing that you believe what you're saying. And when it comes to a man like Jim Valvano, I don't think that anyone's ever doubted that he is whatever he's saying to you is what he truly believes. Like, you're not getting some filtered version. It's not lip service. It's straight from the heart. And I love that.
Authenticity is a commodity, I think, that isn't valued enough today. And I don't think that people traffic in it enough. And look, we're here, we're on YouTube, we're in podcasts. And a lot of times, people who do what we do, they have a persona. Even in your big media markets, there are personas, because what they tell you is that you're supposed to be whatever you are ramped up to 11 or 12 to have good content. And I think that authenticity is something that is missing from a lot of what we do today. When you go back and watch that speech, or even if you just listen to that speech, you can hear the authenticity in it. You know that what he is speaking about is something that he lives. And I think a lot of people who talk a big game don't end up living that big game. Jim Valvano, I'm convinced, did that every single day. And to give that speech at the time that he gave it, he only had, months to live, I think, after that. And he said it even during it. I have cancer all over my body, and they're telling me I have 30 seconds. That, to me, speaks to how strong of a human being he is to be able to get the strength in that moment with everything he had going on. You got to remember, cancer in 1993, it was not almost a death sentence, but it wasn't what it is today. A lot of different types of cancer that people get, they have a real fighting chance now. If you catch it early, there's so many things that we can do now. The technology in medicine has advanced so rapidly, not enough, but so rapidly to where today's cancer patient is much different than what Jimmy V went through. If he got cancer today, he might actually still be alive. He might have lived. And I think the other thing that hits me too is, like you talked about, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for my children, my children's children. And that's kind of where we are. We're the children, and we have children now too. And we're ushering this forward. And it's all because of who he was and being that person every single step of the way. And everybody knew that's who he was. I love it so much. And it's what we want out of this show. Like, what you see from us, this is who we are. We're not fabricating or faking any of this. And that's why when people come at us in comments because we got something wrong or whatever, this is who we are. And you either are watching because you like that and you appreciate it. And if you don't appreciate it, you can keep on moving on.
Yeah. Authenticity, like you said. I mean, we have the ability to edit out anything that we want to, but we don't, right? I mean, we could cut out these mistakes so we don't look bad or whatever. But you know what? It wouldn't be authentic, right? We're human. We make mistakes. I make more than most, and that's fine. And I think that the people we're talking to, for the most part, are people who could relate to that. When you listen to this, I want you to feel like you're listening to a friend, right? Talk to you about their opinion, not some. And don't get me wrong, man. There are people, there are experts out there, right? There are experts you can listen to on the radio every day, on podcasts, very knowledgeable, all sorts of things in the world of sports. That's not what you're going to get here, man. You're just going to get real life human fan opinions. You may like them, you may not, you may agree or disagree, but that's what we're here for, interact. And I know we've kind of hit on this sort of topic the last few weeks, but I just think it's important to kind of revisit it. And authenticity was a good opportunity to bring it up again.
I totally agree. And speaking of coaches, now Jim Valvano was a coach that is in the pantheon of college basketball coaches, probably the biggest upset in college basketball history, all the survive and advance stuff. I think he understood what it meant to be a coach. Now, we call you coach because you were a coach in high school, you coach wrestling. You know what it means. When you're a coach, your job is to teach young men and women. Whatever it is that you coach, you are trying to usher them and lead them to the promised land, whatever promised land that is. And usually, each coach has their own method of doing so, but inspiring, motivating, this is how you get the best out of people. And I think today, though, there are certain coaches at certain institutions that have kind of lost their way a little bit. And I think we can't not start with Northwestern football. And there has been a big dust up in Northwestern football. Now, I want to ask you something, and I don't mean to take a shot at Northwestern in general, but I want to ask you, when you hear Northwestern football, do you think of longstanding traditions of winning?
When I think of Northwestern football, and I had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time there. I actually met Pat Fitzgerald briefly. And when I think of Northwestern football, I mean, what would have come to my mind prior to this situation was integrity, character, kind of, I mean, really, like we joke about those sort of gritty qualities, right, that we talk about here. Maybe not necessarily winning, but when they do win, believing that they're doing it the right way, all those things that you want a football program to be about, that you can respect. Even, there's teams out there that are bad, programs that have been historically terrible, and they also are sort of a circus and what happens there. But I think Northwestern has always garnered a lot of respect because of the way they've handled themselves when it comes to those things we talked about: character, integrity, hardworking, those sort of things. So that's what comes to mind for me. Like, not a long-standing winning tradition. I mean, they've had some good years, but they've also had a lot of bad years.
The reason I ask that is because the hazing thing that has been uncovered over the last couple of weeks that has caused Pat Fitzgerald his job. He's been there 17 years, and he is no longer the head coach of the Northwestern football team. The details that have come out, which anybody could have found by now because this was last week, some of it sounds like it's a mixture of an old school way of thinking. It also sounds like there's a lot of people who have not matured in their life. And I'm talking about adults in the room to the point that they are not capable of really coaching and motivating young people today, because what motivates young people today is not what motivated them 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And when you talk about words like integrity and doing things the right way, when you hear about all the things that have come out about all of this, and even though people have said Pat Fitzgerald maybe wasn't the mastermind behind it, but as the head coach of the program, you are responsible for knowing everything about it. And I can't believe that over a 17-year tenure, he didn't know what was going on there. And so it sounds like the persona that they wanted you to believe, which is the one that you have eaten up hook, line, and sinker, and that's not a bad thing. That's what they want you to believe, is not actually what was happening behind closed doors. And you know what, man? You see this in collegiate sports and professional sports all the time.
There's some parallels between this a little bit. Obviously, not nearly as, I mean, this is serious, but not nearly as serious as like the Penn State situation with Jerry Sandusky and all that stuff, right? Because Penn State had a similar reputation under Joe Paterno. More success, obviously, but a similar reputation that I kind of detailed about Northwestern as far as character and integrity, and that blew up in everyone's face. This is the way I see it when it comes to whether he knew about it or not. If he knew about it and did nothing, he should have been fired. If he didn't know about it, he should have been fired. Like you said, he's responsible. He should, whether he knows about, I mean, he is responsible for knowing everything that's happening within his program. I understand that this day and age, like, these coaches don't always have personal relationships, close personal relationships with all the players on the roster. With the time they have to spend on the road recruiting, there's just so many things. They're more of a CEO, a hands-on, everyday type of person. But as the CEO, especially after 17 years, you've developed and built that culture that this exists in. And at the end of the day, you're the one that has to take responsibility for it. Now, did someone below you maybe drop the ball, which allowed this to happen and grow into what it became? Possibly, right? But at the end of the day, again, that's also your fault. Now the situation in itself, it's so touchy these days, and I'm really not trying to diminish what happened. But this day and age specifically, like, I imagine that this probably started out once upon a time is something almost just a one-off, like, dudes being dudes type of thing, and it took on a life of its own and spiraled out of control and became what we're hearing about. That's how a lot of bad ideas turn into problems. What I don't understand either, though, is I mean, I think most of us would describe a college athlete, football player specifically, sort of a bit of a, not all of them, but a bit of an alpha male, right? Like, I mean, and so I know that not all great athletes or Division I football players have that persona. How would people let this happen to them for as long as they let this happen to them? That's and this is a situation where I think that, like, you physically have the ability to probably put a stop to this. I understand, like, well, what if I'm gonna, I'm gonna upset the apple cart? I'm gonna get kicked out of school because I'm the guy that ran his mouth. It's gonna make my life worse. Those are all realistic concerns, and it's not their fault. I'm not saying it's their fault at all for not putting a stop to it. I'm just surprised that something like this continued for as long as it did without anyone, like a player, intervening at some point and putting a stop to it. I'm very surprised by that.
I think that speaks to the culture of collegiate sports, though, and just sports in general. I mean, this is not something that you would have felt any way about 30 years ago. This kind of hazing thing probably happened all the time in these locker rooms because it was a rite of passage. And I think the reason why players don't say anything is because these coaches have all the power. I know that you kind of sort of spoke to that a little bit earlier and you said, I know that they have fear or whatever. But some of these kids, when they're getting recruited and they're going to these schools, this may be their only option. And their option is not to rock the boat because they're going to miss out on their scholarship and they're not going to have a future. And these coaches know that. Maybe Pat Fitzgerald isn't the one saying that, but a lot of these other coaches that aren't getting paid the same kind of money as him, who maybe are on the hot seat before Pat Fitzgerald gets fired, those coaches know that they have these kids by the balls. They know that a lot of these kids can't afford to lose their scholarship. So what are they going to do? They're not going to say anything. And I think that gives these people a sense of invincibility. And I think it then becomes systemic. And that's what I think happened at Northwestern. It probably started as something fairly innocent, and it's grown to this systemic thing to where, hey, you don't say anything. And this is not something that you speak out on. And I got to say that the kid who spoke out on it, the whistleblower, that took some bravery. And yeah, people might be saying, oh, it's because you didn't get any playing time or whatever. I don't care if you're playing or not. You don't deserve to get treated like crap. There's a fine line between hard coaching and just abuse. And I always said that about Kim Mulkey, that I feel like she kind of toes that line a little bit. But hard coaching is one thing, but what they've described as what happened at this university, it's another thing entirely. And it sounds like it's been happening for a real long time. And I brought up winning because normally this stuff gets swept under the rug when you're winning consistently. And I think it speaks to Northwestern football that they haven't done a ton of winning. They have not won the Big Ten, I don't believe. And Pat Fitzgerald got to keep his job, even though probably a lot of people knew about this.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you have people bringing up Georgia and Kirby Smart and like street racing tickets and stuff like that that have taken place, and people have a problem with it. But that's nothing compared to what happened at Northwestern, in my opinion. And again, like you said, winning covers up a lot. And so one thing I'm gonna push back on a little bit when it comes to Northwestern is you talk about, and other places this is the case, but at Northwestern, I doubt that if you're going to Northwestern, football is probably not your future, I would guess. Now, I would argue, or I could see making the argument that football is facilitating your ability to go to school there for free for what your future is going to be. And so, maybe in a way that it's even more serious than it would be if you didn't give a shit about your degree, right? But the fact that that degree is the reason you're there in the first place, and that you maybe couldn't attend otherwise if you didn't have the scholarship. I mean, sure, like that fear, I think, is probably a real thing. But let's shine a light where it needs to be shown, whatever the word is, on the student journalist, the student newspaper at Northwestern that wrote this article. Not only one, I mean, it takes some stones, first of all. I mean, and you could say also that this is shining. I mean, you're shining the spotlight here on what really should be the bright spot, the focal point of Northwestern University, right? I mean, maybe you're showing them what the real strength of Northwestern University is, and it's not the football program, right? It's what they have going on academically, and a lot of that, we've talked about it before. A lot of that gets lost, right, behind all this the winning. And I do think it's important to give credit where credit's due as far as when it comes to bravery and putting what they've learned and their skills on display in I don't know what you'd call it. I mean, just like I said, a very brave way. I mean, I don't know what other word to use. I mean, it's just a very brave thing to do. And I think that it's one of those deals, and maybe they already knew they had the support of certain people before this thing got published. Even so, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the blowback's going to be, especially in this day and age with deep-pocketed boosters. Who knows what the consequences of something like that could be.
And just because they have support of people within the newspaper, it doesn't mean they have the support from people in the football program. Obviously, their sources, they have support from them because they have to get this information somehow. But, coach, this is real journalism. And we're far away from where we are with this to the point that now sports media is argument television. First Take has taken over television, and I think it's a dumb concept. Like, I can't stand First Take, but it's what people watch because it's catering to a lot of people who maybe aren't thinking in the same way that these journalists are, these kids at this school. Now, again, scholarships are on the line. These kids that are publishing this article, you're right. There's somebody at that university, if they wanted to, who could make their life a living hell and make sure that they don't go anywhere at that university. That fear isn't just for the football players. It's extended to anybody who is going to come out with this story because let's face it, man, Northwestern football doesn't have to win a lot of football games to make that university a lot of money. And so there are people who are making decisions at that university who knew stuff like this was happening and were just making sure that it got swept under the rug. I'm not saying it's this big scandal all the way up to the president. I'm just saying, like, a lot of people had to know about this. You can't keep this under wraps for how long? I mean, Jesus, Rick Pitino was having escorts coming through, and he wasn't even around that long. They weren't even coming around that long because how can you keep that a secret? So all this kind of stuff, people are eventually going to talk about it. And you talked about Jerry Sandusky. That is such an outlier because that would never go on as long as it went on today. And I just think it's a far cry from where journalism is with what these kids did. But I'm glad that they did it because I think that it needed to be exposed. And you're 100% right. That's the positive spin. This is what those kids are at school for, and they did a great job with it. And I'm glad whoever it is that let them publish that article did because it has exposed the football program for what it is. And it's funny. Remember last year we made fun of Scott Frost because he talked about how his kids had to puke 3 times a practice and they were, 2-9 the previous season? And this is kind of the same thing, man. Like, I know Pat Fitzgerald gets a lot of praise because of how he handled himself. He does things the old school way. Well, very clearly, he doesn't embody all of that because he doesn't seem to embody some of the things that I think we all wanted him to embody. Just my opinion.
Do you think that words like character and integrity have evolved in their definition over time?
I don't think people know what they mean anymore. When you say somebody has integrity, when I think of integrity, I think to myself, that's somebody that I can trust. It's somebody that I can count on, rely on, that when they tell me something, they tell me they're going to do something, right? That they believe it, that they're going to do it. And I think having character, when you look at how people treat other people, I don't think of somebody's character as how much money they have or whatever. I think of it as when I watch how they treat the women in their life, how do they treat their kids? Are they nice people when you go out? Like, I judge people's characters when they don't hold the door open for somebody behind them and they just let it slam in your face. And you're like, you can't have good character. And I think today when people say integrity, I think they misalign it with something of somebody has integrity because they continue to do something that benefits me, right? Or my path forward. Having integrity has nothing to do with what somebody can do for you. It's just something that you should have to be a good, decent human being.
And those are good points. And I'm sitting here, I'm thinking in my own head as you're talking. I'm like, you know what? Like I made that determination about what I thought about Pat Fitzgerald based off of things that he said, solely words that came out of his mouth. I'd never seen Pat Fitzgerald do shit other than stand in front of people and speak. And then, you see him on TV on Saturdays. You hear that old thing. It's like, character, to me, character is how you treat someone who can't help you, who can't do anything for you. Character is how you treat the janitor when you and the janitor are the only people in the building and there's no one else around to hear or see how you address them. Character is, it's a whole thing. Well, they say what self-discipline is what you do when no one's watching. Character is who you are when there's no one around to judge you on your actions. Obviously, I never saw Pat Fitzgerald in those moments. Just like I said, I'm literally just making this judgment of him based off the words I've come out of his mouth. And just think of how often we do that. And yeah, sure, that's literally all I'd have to go off of. I don't have any way to know more about the guy than that. And most of the country doesn't either. It just shows how much we take people, or we would like to take people at face value for what they say, but without really any insight to how they behave when the cameras are off and there's no one around to impress.
But this is how sports works, though, is these athletes, these coaches, these executives, they want you to believe one thing when they are something else. How many athletes have we all thought were great people? Turns out that they're not. How many people thought Tiger Woods was an upstanding individual? I'm not saying Tiger Woods is a bad dude, but what he did, all of that infidelity, that was far cry from the persona that he wanted you to believe was the case. This family guy, right? This clean cut guy. And that wasn't who he was, right? That's not the life that he was living behind closed doors. And I think that today you nailed it. I think too many people think about what can somebody do for me. Like, let's take this show, for instance. We're creeping up on 200 subscribers. Let's say that there was somebody on the horizon that we wanted to talk to that had 50 million subscribers. We wouldn't treat that person any differently than somebody that we meet on the street. Just because that person has something that we don't doesn't mean that we're going to do anything differently to them. We're going to treat them the same way that we normally would. And I always say that respect is earned. And if you go out of your way to disrespect me, you're probably not going to get any respect back from me. It's an earned quality. People who have character, people who have integrity, these types of things. To me, it's innate in humanity. And I think not enough people realize that these are traits that we need to be cultivating. We need to be grooming like any kind of muscle. It's easy to be a terrible person. Really, it is. It's really easy to be negative all the time. But to be kind to everybody, even if they can't help you out, and maybe you're in a time of need, those are the times when you can look at yourself in the mirror or in the camera and say, I'm doing the best that I can do. That's my goal every single day. Do I achieve it? No. Is Pat Fitzgerald the worst person in the world? No. But I think when it comes to this particular incident, the kind of power that he had, the influence that he just laid down on the job and didn't do a good enough job of cultivating character and integrity in himself and therefore in the Northwestern football program. Hard stop.
So I'm going to say this, like you threw out some athletes, right? Tiger Woods and things like that. I've kind of said it before. I'll say it again. Like I view these situations differently. I don't feel like I do not feel that Tiger Woods has any obligation to anybody to be a certain way, but if you are a leader of a franchise, of a program, of an organization, whatever it is, like you now have an obligation to you are molding young men, young women into productive human beings and members of society. Like you have a different responsibility than to yourself. And so you are and should be held to a different standard. And so that's why I will judge while even with these allegations, we could probably still argue that Pat Fitzgerald may be a better human being than some pro athlete out there that's still playing, that's never been suspended or anything else. But two different standards. I think you have to remember that. Now, I'm not saying I agree with the behavior of some people, some pro athletes or whatever, but they have no obligation to be a leader, to demonstrate these qualities. And I mean, if they do, that's great, right? That's icing on the cake. That's fantastic. If you're a coach or anything else, different standard, like I said, and you kind of hit on something else I wanted to mention when you said, if we found someone with 500,000 subscribers or whatever, like my fear with approaching somebody like that is that I wouldn't want that person to feel like we were trying to use them. You know what I mean? Because that isn't it at all. I mean, we would stand probably to gain significantly from talking to somebody like that. There's no denying that. But that would not be my motive in any way, shape, or form. And so, it's like there's times when you and I have had this conversation offline before where I almost shy away from different opportunities possibly because almost out of fear of people assuming an ulterior motive in some way and where that's not it at all. You know what I'm saying? But like you said, people are so programmed to, for that, what can you do for me sort of thing. And it just kind of sucks that things are that way.
It does suck. And honestly, I think that's an indictment on where we're headed in terms of our humanity. I think people assume the worst in everybody. And I think also people aren't doing enough to cultivate being a good human being. And the Northwestern thing we could talk about for a while. Obviously, the head coaching vacancy is out there. They're going to find another head coach. They're probably going to find somebody who's the exact opposite of Pat Fitzgerald because you know how PR goes. They're going to try to find something that steers everybody away from that conversation, and they eventually will. But I want to move on to another guy that we have talked about. And this is a little bit more funny, I think, because Pat Fitzgerald and everything at Northwestern is serious stuff. Bob Huggins, we talked about him a couple of months ago. Remember that little radio incident that he had with some, I want to say, some insensitive comments with some West Virginia radio disc jockeys?
Yes, I do certainly recall Uncle Bob.
Yeah, well, Uncle Bob had himself a night a couple of weeks ago where he got a DUI. And I always thought that Bob Huggins was going to retire at the end of last season. Apparently, he didn't. They signed him to an extension, although they paid him a little bit less money, remember. And he was staying on as the head coach of the West Virginia Mountaineers basketball team. Well, after this DUI, apparently that was a bridge too far for West Virginia. I'm not really sure how they make that jump, and that just speaks to why I can't stand West Virginia University. And they decided, you know what? A DUI is too much. We can't have this. You're fired. Or they made him resign. And apparently he did everything he could to resign. He resigned in multiple different ways, signed all these different papers, supposedly, and recently came out via his lawyers who said, hey, you never fired me, or I never resigned, so I'm entitled to X amount of money. This is so ridiculous. Bob Huggins needs to just go away.
That's funny. We talk about this stuff with Bob Huggins, and it's like Pac-Man Jones says, "Hold my beer," right? Morgantown legend Pac-Man Jones.
Ugh.
Anyways, one thing. This is like one funny thought I've had when we talk about how now he's all of a sudden like, I didn't quit. I didn't resign. I wish that somewhere he would say to somebody, or it was on record, where he was like, "I didn't resign. I was drunk when I said that." Like, I wish that would happen. That would be fantastic.
Would that be better, though? Because you and I both talk about authenticity. We talked about it earlier with Jimmy V. I would rather Bob Huggins be himself. You said it on that episode. Be who you are, but own it. Own everything about it. And if Bob Huggins came out and said, I didn't resign because I was drunk, at least I'd be like, okay, that's obviously who Bob Huggins is. But I think Bob Huggins falls in this category of old guys who don't want to be progressive in any way. I'm not asking you to be pro transgender or anything like that, right? But I think that you cannot be down with the cause and just keep your mouth shut and not say anything. And if you get a DUI, be like, I think at this point in society, we have figured out that we're not supposed to drive drunk. I think everybody kind of knows that, right? This is not something that's uncommon. It's not something you have to go look up on Google. Everybody knows it. Don't drink and don't drive. Bob Huggins can't do either of these things, but at least be who you are and say, you know what? I f***ed up. I'm out. But no, he's not going to do that because legally speaking, he has to get a severance package because everybody needs to get their damn money. Same thing happened at Northwestern too. Pat Fitzgerald, I was not fired for probable cause. You take your money and leave.
Yeah, that's what it's about in these cases. I don't think that either of these guys are trying to argue that they didn't make a mistake. It's all just posturing so they could eventually settle on getting at least a portion of whatever buyout they're entitled to or believe they're entitled to. That's it, man. It's purely a money thing. And hey, we've said it before, man. Like, the end of the day, there's only one thing that matters, and it's the Benjamins.
But how stupid does this make West Virginia look? Like, how stupid does it make you look? You don't fire him the first time. You re-sign the guy. I know he got paid less money. I'm so sad for the guy. And then this is it? Like, this is the bridge too far. A
Iceman.
DUI. I just don't understand it.
Iceman, think about what you just say, man. How did you just start your last statement?
I don't know. I'm so
Your
fired
last
up, I forget. I
How
blacked out.
how stupid does this make West Virginia look? Like,
Fair
that's
point.
what you said. Okay? Like, you act like this is some unprecedented like behavior, right? From the Mountaineers. It's not, man. Like, it isn't.
Okay, let me be clear. Let me just be clear. First of all, if you have an opinion about any of this, 703-718-6314 is the number to give that. Perfect show right there, but I would love to know. I need to be perfectly transparent with everybody. We talked about authenticity. 2003, October of 2003, I believe, I took a trip to Morgantown, West Virginia with some friends of mine because the Virginia Tech Hokies, at that point in the season, the number 3 Virginia Tech Hokies were playing the West Virginia Mountaineers, who were one of our biggest rivals in a college football matchup. Well, Virginia Tech did what they do. They became the Chokies, and they lost a game when they are in the top 3 or against another good team. And that was the couch burning episode. I think that's when some of that started. Well, during that game, I had many things thrown at me merely for just wearing a Virginia Tech hat and jersey. Not because I said anything. And so since that moment, when you have like one of those 9-volt, those big batteries thrown at you, those big guys that they use in like those camping lanterns.
Oh, yeah. I mean, who's gonna throw a AAA?
I know. I mean, I get it. Okay, you want the maximum amount of value. Well, when you hit what wasn't the Iceman at the time, but when you hit me with it, I'm going to have no respect for you. And I have no respect for West Virginia University. I have no respect for their football program, their basketball program. And that is me being transparent about my hatred. And I have a bias against you all. But I still think, objectively, though, how dumb does a university look by doing this? It doesn't have to be West Virginia. It blows my mind. Like, where are we, man? Like, I thought college used to be pure, and now it's just a cesspool.
Come on, man. Like, they just got electricity. Give them a break. Like, I mean, like, I'll say this though, like in full like transparency. Like, I had a friend that went to WVU, and I went down there a couple times. Right, I went to a football game. This is in the Pat White, Steve Slayton, Pat McAfee days, man. And I tell you what, I had a really good time in West Virginia. To be honest with you, it's one of those groups of people that if you are a part of it. Now, we didn't throw any batteries at anybody. I wasn't a part of that. We did scream obscenities at some old people from Marshall. Like, that did happen. But, no, there was no casting of batteries or any other large objects. I did not burn any couches. I did get kicked out of a diner. But anyways, I mean, yeah, whatever, just stupid stuff. I mean, I was probably doing my best Bob Huggins impression at Eaton Park in Morgantown, West Virginia, and like me and some buddies were we literally just sat down at the table, and like they had like a little window, and the window had like a flower bed in it, and I'm like, oh, these are 100% like plastic plants. And I just grab one and rip it out of there and sit on the table. Not a plastic plant, like 100% real plant. And we didn't have our drinks yet, man, and we were asked to leave. Not my proudest moment, but I'm guarantee you that's not the first time that someone's been kicked out of that restaurant for doing the same thing. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's definitely wild, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how this plays out. And I mean, do you think that he eventually, just like the Huggins eventually rides off into the sunset, or do you think that like he'll be a retread at some like desperate mid-major?
Wasn't Rick Pitino at St. John's now? So they have decided that they're going to retread. Rick Pitino looks like a vampire. Like, there's just no getting around it. He looks terrible. He looks decrepit and terrible. Bob Huggins, I just don't think has the energy in him to change schools. Like, can you imagine Bob Huggins at an HBCU? Please, everybody laugh at this concept.
Oh, no, no, not at all, man. No, not a chance. No.
You don't think he's the next Coach Prime, bringing Jackson State to the big heights of the NCAA tournament?
No.
I'm not seeing it.
Who was the program that he slandered? I don't think it was BYU. Is that who it was?
That would be perfect, wouldn't it? It's like the exact antithesis of who Bob Huggins is.
It was like, I thought it was either, I think it was like a religious school, or a school that had some like very specific affiliation. I don't know why it escapes me right now, but yeah, we'll see what happens there. It'll be interesting. It's always fun to poke a little fun at our friends in West Virginia. You know what we should do sometime, and we don't have to do it today, but maybe on some pick of the week or something like that's a little more relevant. We'll have to do a wager. If I win, or if you lose specifically, you have to sing Country Roads by John Denver on an episode of Iceman and Coach.
I actually like that song.
Oh, I do too, man. I love it. Like, I've definitely rocked it at karaoke a few times. Not anytime recently, but like 10 years ago.
I just want to say one more thing before we move on, that if your exploits in Morgantown, Virginia get this show canceled before we've even gotten things off the ground because somebody found video footage of it, I'm going to be very upset. I just want you to know that.
Hey, if they come at me, but old Bob can just do what he's been doing, then there's definitely a problem.
Iceman's Stat of the Week. Coach and I like to have a little bit of fun every single week. I have my Stat of the Week. He has his Pick of the Week. And so we're going to start with my Stat of the Week. Coach, are you ready?
Yes, sir, man. I tell you what, I've been desperate for a good Stat of the Week.
Well, I had a few that I wanted to pick from because, whenever we miss a week, I try to have as many as the weeks that we miss. But I had a couple lined up, and then this came across my bow, and I had to Had to share it with you. Are you familiar with former NFL quarterback Philip Rivers?
Yes, I think I know what you're going to say. I sure am.
Yes, well, Philip Rivers is known for throwing pick sixes with less than a minute to go on the opponent's 20-yard line. He's known for being probably will end up being a Hall of Fame quarterback, and I think the most famous thing he's known for is getting traded for Eli Manning, essentially. He's also very, very adept at doing something else, and that is having children. Philip Rivers is a virtuoso, basically impregnator, if you will say this. So Philip Rivers recently announced that his wife is pregnant with their 10th child, which means Philip Rivers can now be the designated quarterback for his entire offensive kids. Isn't that amazing?
That's crazy, man. Like I don't know. That sounds exhausting. Like I feel like the only way that you could do that is if you're someone that had the means to pay for people to help you. Because I have no clue how you could ever manage it alone.
There is no way. Like, I get triggered thinking about having a second child at my age now. I'm 40. I just don't want to deal with that. I think you're right, though. I think that for Philip Rivers, even though he's a very simple dude, like, I think he lives a very simple life despite the fact having made a lot of money. That is one thing he probably can put his money toward. And he definitely strikes me as the kind of guy who thinks it is his job and his duty to basically plant his seed just about anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it. Like he's like like our ancestors, right? From once upon a time that it's like I feel like they had more kids back in the day, right? Because you wanted more help on the farm sort of deal is what it amounted to. And like that's just like I don't know if like his family or his wife's family were farmers back in the day and that gene just passed along the way or what. Philip Rivers definitely spreading the seed, no doubt about that.
Yeah. Congrats to you, buddy, on having an entire offense that you can play with. And I'm going to give this one to you because it's just too funny not to share. You probably heard the rumor or the signing that the Tennessee Titans got DeAndre Hopkins, and obviously that's a good receiver, comes with a lot of pedigree or whatever. Do you know, before they signed him, who the leading receiver in terms of touchdowns was on the Titans prior to his signing? Career receiving touchdowns now.
Mike Vrabel.
Yes.
I heard that on the radio today. Mike Vrabel.
Yes, and I remember him specifically catching a touchdown in a Super Bowl. So that is how long ago Mike Vrabel played, but I thought it was just absolutely insane. The Titans are not going to be very good this year, but DeAndre Hopkins will look nice out there in all those blue colors.
With those jam-packed full pockets of all that money they're going to pay him.
The trumpets have blared. It is time for Coach's Pick of the Week, so everybody rejoice. The Coach's losing streak continues. He has now lost 9 straight, which, by the way, was the exact losing streak of the National League in the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. They snapped their streak last week, winning 3-2 over the American League. Coach, you have a chance to be on par with the National League with your Pick of the Week this week, so please bless us with a Pick of the Week.
Hear ye, hear ye. Golf fans around the world, this weekend is the Open. We go to the old country, right, where the sport of golf was founded and created by gentlemen with tall hats and fancy suits. Poor people be gone. There's a pretty deep field this weekend. And I've really, I still at this second, I haven't quite nailed down my pick. I've bounced back and forth from a few people. And I guarantee you, I'm picking an American. And so that's narrowed it down a little bit, to be honest. So anyways, my pick of the week that's going to get me off the schneid is none other than Brooks Koepka. The dude just wins majors. That's what he does. He's gotten back on track after a couple of rough seasons. And I think that he's going to take the next step towards, what do they call it? The Grand Slam of golf or whatever. He's going to put himself in contention for that by winning the Open. So give me Brooks Koepka to win, I believe it's called, the Claret Jug.
Brooks Koepka to win what was formerly known as the British Open and is now known as just the Open Championship. Coach, I hope this is the one for you, but this is another one. Brooks versus the field. So let it be written. So let it be done. All right, my man, we have reached the end of the show, but I want to ask you one thing. Now that they have moved the PGA to May. Do you think that the British Open, or the Open, is probably the least watched major of the golf season?
I don't know. Nah, I don't think so. I feel like it's more prestigious than the US Open, in my opinion. I mean, I do think that in the history of golf that the Open is outside of, like, for me as an American golf fan, and I'm not like a true I mean, I'm a very casual American golf fan. There's the Masters, and then really I think it's the Open. And then we could go to the US Open, and then I'd put the PGA last, in my opinion. But I'm just some guy.
I'm going to leave that for next week because you just dropped a major bomb there that I think we need to explore next week. But do you have any other parting thoughts or hot takes for the listeners before we get out of here?
No, again, we keep closing closer and closer to the finest time of year, and that is football season, and we're looking forward to it. We got some exciting things coming up, and hope everybody finds a little free time this weekend to watch Brooks Koepka dominate the Open and put me back to my winning ways.
We can only hope so. And as he said before, we have a lot of exciting things coming up. Football season is right around the corner. We are actually planning some pretty big events, I think. We're not ready to announce them yet because we're still finalizing a few things, but I think it's going to be worth your time. So if you are listening in the podcasting space, these are going to be probably YouTube items, and you're going to want to hit that subscribe button. But before we get out, don't forget to support the Pub Time podcast. Obviously, easy for me to say. That's where Coach and Ryan do their thing over there. They have a lot of fun stuff going on, so check them out wherever it is that you find your podcast. Obviously, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It's not mandatory. It is super helpful, though. And on social media, you can find us on TikTok. That is where we get the most engagement. At Iceman and Coach Pod is the handle to find us on TikTok. I like to put a lot of clips that are a little bit inflammatory, so go ahead and find us there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, don't forget to hit follow. Don't forget to hit rate. Give us a few stars. I've been a little bit late putting out the audio, but don't worry. The audio listeners are still some of our favorite listeners. They're where we started. So please don't think that we have forgotten about you. It's just life has gotten busy, and we have to prioritize things. And, of course, please support the Matty Ice Media Network, MattyIceMedia.com. Coach, it has been wonderful to see you. To everybody that is watching, I hope this finds you well. I hope this finds you safe. And as always, this is Iceman and Coach.